Good morning, students. Today we are going to start the third module on the topic disaster risk management. So already you have seen the elements of or the cycle of disaster management. What are the factors we should be ready for the risk reduction, then preparedness, mitigation, prevention. All this we have just seen in the first module about the cycle of disaster risk management or disaster management cycle. So in this module we'll be just dealing in detail what each term means. Moving to the definition of disaster risk management, it is a systematic process of using administrative directives, organization and operations, skills and capacities to implement strategies, policies, and improved coping capacities in order to lessen the adverse impacts of hazard and the possibility of disaster. So, disaster risk management means managing means we are reducing or we are going to give some options to how to withstand a disaster, post disaster, or even before pre disaster stage. So here we will be using certain policies or certain strategies by so that we can lessen or we can reduce the effect of the hazard and the possibility of disaster. So various frameworks have been proposed to understand the phases and process of disaster risk management. So the framework you can see in this figure as what starting from the cycle, disaster risk management cycle. The main elements include the figure you can see. First, we are going to identify the assessment or a risk identification of the risk. There we'll be doing the hazard analysis and monitoring and vulnerability analysis, determination of risk. These three things we have already learned in the second module. After that, the next step is prevention and mitigation, that is land use planning, land management, non-structural measures, which will be dealing in the coming topics. After that, the next stage is the preparedness. The preparedness is early warning, evacuation, emergency planning, and then in between the preparedness stage and the recovery stage, the event can occur. The event or the disaster occurs, and at the recovery stage, we are going to work on the rehabilitation, reconstruction, or rescue services. And again after recovery the cycle goes on. The processes from risk identification, prevention and mitigation, then preparedness, recovery, and back to risk identification. This cycle goes on so that in between we have the disaster risk management. Every part of this cycle is connected to the management part of the disaster risk. So first step is the risk identification and assessment. This involves the determining and analyzing the potential, original characteristics and behavior of hazard. Already we have learned the different types of hazards, and also we have learned about hazard mapping. Hazard mapping, the elements or the advantages of hazard mapping is we can characterize their place based on the occurrence of a disaster. Also the how much that area is vulnerable, or how much hazardous is that area, can be done by the first step, by hazard analysis or hazard mapping. And then comes the application of risk reduction measures in mitigation, that we have not learned. We will become learning in detail in this module. Planning and implementation of structural interventions or non-structural measures such as disaster legislation, that is certain rules can be formed even after a disaster occurs, so that the coming time or coming years, the buildings could be constructed, buildings or the other structures could be constructed by following the legislation. Then third comes disaster preparedness and emergency management activities. So preparedness and emergency always includes the measures to be taken immediately, or preparedness means just before this disaster occurs. What all ways we can prepare? That is about disaster preparedness and emergency management. Now coming, we can just go through activities and measures taken in advance to ensure effective response to the impact of hazard, including measures related to timely and effective warnings as well as evacuation and emergency planning. All this we have already learned in the first module and second module. Here just in detail we have mentioned about the terms related to the disaster cycle. So same things are again mentioned. So recovery and reconstruction, the decisions and actions taken in the post disaster phase with a view to restoring the living condition of a affected population. So that is also very already told in the first module. A disaster risk management framework has several alternatives. One of the alternatives are shown in the next element, that is the disaster cycle is at the core and encompasses the usual elements of disaster risk management. Each of the core elements has been expanded to show most of the factors that are not easily discernible at the macro scale. So again you can see the disaster cycle little more divided in the part, that is first is the risk assessment cycle starts from risk assessment or disaster cycle. Then you can see what are the steps in the disaster risk assessment: hazard analysis and vulnerability analysis. Then comes the mitigation and prevention. Third is the preparedness planning. Fourth is the protection and warning. Fifth is the response, and sixth is the recovery. So those things are again divided and just explaining in detail, like hazard analysis, what are the details included in hazard analysis, what are the details included in vulnerability analysis, how we are going to mitigate and prevent, also how we are going to prepare and plan, also how we are going to predict and give early warning to the people around. Then how the um, human or the buildings responds to the disaster and how they get recovered. So that is a cycle which everyone should know, learning the disaster cycle. Now disaster risk reduction, the concept and practice of reducing the risk reduction through systematic efforts to analyze and manage the causal factors of disaster include reduce exposure to hazard, lessen vulnerability of people and property, wise management of land and the environment, and improve preparedness for adverse events. So how we can reduce the risk, that is mentioned in the term disaster risk reduction. So our aim should be to reduce the risk and reduce the effect on human, people, environment, and also to make prepare or to prepare the people to overcome these events. So DRR, in short, disaster risk reduction, is limited in scope compared with disaster risk management, which combines prevention, mitigation, and preparedness with response. So here you can just see the international policy arena giving the importance of disaster risk reduction in their framework for action. First is governance, two is risk identification, assessment, monitoring, and early warning. Three is knowledge management and education. Four is reducing underlying risk factors. Five is the preparedness for effective response and recovery. Also the Sendai framework, we have this Sendai framework to learn in detail in the next module. So the framework for the action was succeeded by the Sendai framework for Disaster Reduction 2015 to 30 at the third United Nations World Conference, which took place in March in Japan. The four cornerstones of risk reduction are the community or stakeholder participation, two public policy actions, three safer construction and urban development, five development of a culture of prevention. So the four parallel cornerstones. One is by achieving or by implementing this disaster risk reduction, we can have a development like disaster risk reduction framework is benefited to the community or stakeholder participation. Stakeholders means those who are affected by uh, the disaster, or the people who are working for the disaster reduction, all can be included as stakeholders. Then public policy actions, implementations or public policy actions are also uh, taken in the framework, by in the policy framework. Three, safer construction and urban development. So hereafter there will be some policies on based on this framework, and better construction or safer construction and urban development will be given prime importance. Then the last one is development of a culture of prevention. So we are trying to save the whole world, or we are trying to save a particular place from an unexpected disaster. So these are the things we included in disaster risk management. I will just summarize. We have just gone through the disaster risk management strategies, or what is in the cycle, what happens in a disaster management cycle. It was just mentioned in detail how we can reduce the disaster risk through disaster risk reduction frameworks. That is all summarized in this topic.